Here at Spiked, we believe in questioning everything. Even the most controversial ideas deserve a fair hearing. That's why we're excited to announce that this episode of the Spiked podcast is sponsored by the Monk Debates. The Monk Debates give a platform for leading political figures and thinkers to discuss the big issues of the day. Unlike a lot of what passes for discussion in the mainstream media nowadays, these debates aren't about regurgitating sound bites or humiliating the other side. They're reasoned, timely, and respectful. The next Monk debate is on anti-Zionism, and it will be no different. On the 17th of June, commentator Douglas Murray, broadcaster Mehdi Hassan, and others will discuss whether anti-Zionism is the same as anti-Semitism. The debate will be taking place in downtown Toronto in Canada, but Monk Debate supporters can live stream the event for free. If that debate doesn't quite sound like your bag, then Monk still has you covered. Its archive feature 15 years worth of interesting discussions, dialogues, and podcasts. Past debates have explored the perils of political correctness, the shiftiness of the mainstream media, and the potential dangers of AI, and much, much more. Monk Debates also draw in world-renowned thinkers, including Jordan Peterson, Stephen Fry, Yanis Varoufakis, and many more. For just $9.99 Canadian dollars, or just under £6 per month, you can become a Monk Debates supporter. That'll get you loads of extra perks, like being able to buy tickets before the general public. Plus, you can live stream all the in-person events at no extra cost. And you'll also get exclusive access to the Monk Debates archives. For a limited time only, Monk Debates are offering 10% discounts on supporter membership for fans of this podcast. Just use the code SPIKED10 at the checkout to get 10% off. So, to find out more and claim your supporter discount, go to monkdebates.com. That's MUNK debates.com. And don't forget to use the discount code SPIKED10 to get 10% off. That's code SPIKED10 at the checkout at monkdebates.com. Hello and welcome to the Spike podcast. I'm Fraser Myers. With me as ever, we have Spike's editor, Tom Slater.
Hello.
And we're joined by Spectator's deputy editor, Freddy Gray.
Hello, Fraser.
So we've got plenty to discuss on today's show. We'll be looking at Trump's trial, the assassination attempt on Robert Fico, the Meghan and Harry's trip to Nigeria, and Gary Lineker's virtue signalling over Gaza. But before we get into that, I just want to remind all of the viewers at home that the internship, Spike's internship, the deadline is coming up on Sunday, the 19th of May. You literally, if you're watching this on Friday when it comes out, you only have a few days. So do not delay your application. You can come here, work with us for a paid 6-month placement. You do not want to miss out on this opportunity. So to find out more, just go to spiked-online.com/interns and get that application in quick. So we're now in week 5, I think, of the Trump trial in Manhattan over the alleged hush money scandal / fraud. I mean, Freddie, a lot of people are struggling to get their heads around what actually the crime is supposed to be here that Trump has committed.
Well, it's a mystery, but partly because the prosecution hasn't made it entirely clear. There are 34 counts of which are all related to falsification of business records, but those in themselves are not the crime. They're supposed to be connected to another crime, and it's thought that that crime is a federal crime to do with covering up something for a campaign, for a presidential campaign. I've read the indictment. I've forgotten most of it. It's incredibly boring. And what I find amazing about this trial is that, you know, it's so dull. And who knew that kind of porn stars, corruption, dodgy lawyers, sex, adultery, who knew it could be made so dull? And yet it has been. Partly because anybody who's interested in Trump world knows all these stories already.
Yeah.
And partly because it's just obviously a political hit job, and Trump isn't wrong to say that.
Yeah.
It just very obviously is.
I mean, Tom, how have we got to this place where, you know, such an obviously politicized trial can take place in an alleged democracy like the United States?
I think the problem is the fact that a lot of this is almost unthinking on the part of a lot of the Democratic establishment. There's a clear-cut desire to get Trump, even to the point where Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan district attorney, was basically elected on this platform. Yeah. I'm the man who will bring Donald Trump to trial. And yet at the same time, I think because they've got swept up in this idea that they're not out there punishing their political opponents, which is what they're doing. Yeah. It's the fact that they are saving America from proto-fascism effectively in the form of Donald Trump. So they get carried along with themselves. And I think as a consequence of that, they haven't realised what a spectacular own goal a lot of this has been. I mean, part of the reason that there's been so much focus on this trial is, aside from all the other indictments that have been lodged against Trump, is because it's the one that is taking place clearly before the election, and there's a good chance of a conviction before the election, so that if all goes to plan from the Democrats' perspective, Joe Biden will be able to say, my opponent, who is a felon, who has been convicted of X, Y, Z. The problem is this is also one of the weakest of the indictments. There's all sorts of things that you could get Trump for effectively. But this one, as you were saying, Freddie, this kind of essentially kind of like misdemeanor to do with creative accounting, which has been basically inflated and turned into a felony off the basis that he was trying to influence the election in some way, shape or form, is seemingly the one that, even if it succeeds, is still going to look like a grubby business and is still going to contribute to Trump's narrative that this is all a political hit job, because, as Freddie says, it is. But I think the reason that they've ended up in this point is just because they're very carried away with themselves. And as a consequence of that, and we've seen this for many years now with the Democrats, they don't even recognise when they're making what could be quite catastrophic mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, do you think it's sort of backfiring, Freddie? I mean, obviously it does play into Trump's narrative, but are the public buying Trump's narrative? Are they buying, the Biden narrative?
I mean, certainly the lawfare against Trump appears to have backfired if you look at the polls. There's a Fulton County jailhouse mugshot of Trump. Yeah. Pretty much his polls have been going up since that was taken. But I think that, there is also polling that suggests if he's a convicted criminal, a lot of independents say they won't vote for a convicted criminal. I think that might actually change come November, because it is such a weird situation. He could be in jail. There's all these sort of different possibilities that go on. I mean, we just don't know. We don't know what's going to happen in this case. It'll be very interesting to see. I think what I'm finding amazing about the trial this week is, in classic Trump style, he's managed to turn it into a reality TV event. Yeah. By getting, apparently Team Trump, the Trump campaign, are getting everybody who wants to have a cabinet position, who wants to be vice president, who wants to just be a staffer and just to get in that courtroom. So you're seeing them all with their red ties, a sort of sign of solidarity with the president. Mm-hmm. And I spoke to Steve Bannon on Tuesday, Trump's former chief strategist, and he was saying, MAGA now wants every single guy to be out there behind the sticks, defending Donald Trump. And so now you see them. And so now it's become this complete circus. Yeah. And it's a great testament to Trump's ability to make everything ridiculous, and his ability to take something that he knows people are finding boring and turn it into something where people are like, oh, he's there today. That's interesting. He could be vice president. He could be energy secretary. I thought he hated Trump, but he's there now. So it's amazing Trump circus. Yeah.
And Tom, I mean, in terms of the sort of race generally, lots of polling suggesting that Trump is out ahead in many key battleground states. He's doing much better than previously among young voters, among Hispanic voters, even increases in black voters. I mean, it doesn't actually look too good for Biden. His strategy is not working.
It doesn't. I mean, it's still very close, we should say, on the kind of national picture. You're looking at sort of neck and neck. But the New York Times Siena poll that was published this week is fascinating because of the fact that it not only shows that he's doing a lot better than people expected, but it also again explodes so many of the claims about Trump in terms of who he draws his support from and who he repels. So as you suggest, between Biden and Trump at the moment, it's basically a dead heat amongst 18 to 25-year-olds. It's also a dead heat amongst Hispanic voters. We knew that was happening anyway, but that's a pretty striking potential high watermark in Hispanic support for the Republicans. If the polls are correct, he's on track to reach about 20% African-American support, which would be like the highest since the 1960s, since the passing of the Civil Rights Act. And this is the person who we were told only really spoke to white rural rage, who was the most racist candidate in history, who was this fascistic candidate. And yet he seems to be, despite all of the smears and also despite all of the things that he himself, all of the antics that he himself has got up to over recent years, is still kind of basically putting together this quite diverse, multiracial working class coalition. And even if he doesn't make it over the line in the election, I mean, even if he falls short, I mean, it would be remarkable if a lot of this lawfare didn't have some kind of effect. It's going to inspire some people to vote for him. It's going to put other people off. The significant nature of the movement that he's kind of cultivated still can't be ignored. And even if, as I say, it falls short, it's there for the taking for someone else later on down the line.
Yeah.
And actually, interesting that what that poll also showed is that he's actually getting weaker in very white states like Michigan, Wisconsin, places where angry working class white voters are his bread and butter. He's actually that's now a problem for him, partly because of the abortion issue, which is the only way Biden wins this election. As a practicing Catholic, the only way Biden wins this election is through abortion, and I think that's an extraordinary dynamic.
Yeah, that is, and they both agreed to do a debate as well, significantly this week. I mean, are you looking forward to that at all? Is anyone looking forward to that?
I love it. I love watching awful things happen. And this is going to be one of the worst TV events of all time. It was terrible. I don't know if you remember the first debate in 2020. It was appalling.
I think, didn't Joe Biden speak for a lot of us when he said, will you shut up, man?
That was it. And that was the winning moment of the debate. That won him the debate. And I think, Trump may have had COVID. Actually, interestingly, I think Trump was said to have been ill. He never admits to being ill until it's very obvious, and he had to do it with COVID. But he may have been ill in the first Hillary Clinton debate in 2016. He was sniffling a lot. Some people thought that's because he was doing cocaine. I don't think that's right. But in 2020, he was not obviously on quite bad form, but sort of amped up and very aggressive. And he kept on interrupting Biden. And then you had the shut up line. But now fast forward 4 years to 2024, both men are older. Biden is a ghost sometimes. I mean, sometimes he's lucid. He can be lucid. And expectations for his performance are so low that he can almost not fail now, unless he falls over and dies mid-debate. But Trump is not a good debater. He was very good on the stage in 2016 with about 15 others. Being the centre of attention, hogging the limelight, counterpunching. He's a good rhetorical counterpuncher. But if it's a 1v1 debate, Hillary Clinton really beat him.
Yeah. He kind of made it back on the one-liners, though.
When the standing up one, where they followed each other around. And
that very odd,
very weird
stalking
dynamic.
Each other kind of setup.
Yes, but in the first one, the first one is the most watched. She really, I think, was across the detail. He wasn't. It's a worry for Team Trump now, because whatever happens, I think a lot of the media are going to say, actually, Joe Biden wasn't as bad as we think, unless of course.
Just because expectations have been set so low. And we got actually a clip of Trump at a recent rally, so maybe this is a taster of some of the campaign to come.
Has anyone ever seen The Silence of the Lambs? The late, great Hannibal Lecter is a wonderful man. He oftentimes would have a friend for dinner.
I suppose that just shows how unpredictable this election could be. Anything could happen. Trump or perhaps even Biden could say literally anything between now and November.
But it's also a reminder that one thing that Trump has always had in his favour is that he's very funny, and he's often put up against incredibly humourless candidates. So even comments like this, which were kind of written up as, he's losing it because he thinks that Hannibal Lecter's real. There's this kind of assumption that to take him very literally whenever he says anything like this. But I do, I'm not looking forward to that debate. It was like last time around, it was sort of like the unstoppable force and the immovable object.
Yeah.
But I think Shane Gillis had a routine about this, a comedy routine. We was talking about the problem with Biden is that he's almost like, you can throw all these insults at him, but he can't really hear you. He goes, huh? And that's the end of it. So it's not going to play out particularly well, I don't say. But no, we're in for another roller coaster ride, that's for sure.
And Freddie, we still don't know who Trump's VP pick is, but presumably Kamala Harris is locked in.
Kamala Harris does seem to be locked in. And that's why, because 3/4 of this election, you've got Biden, Trump, same thing, Kamala Harris, same thing. The intriguing thing is who Trump's going to pick. And speaking to a lot of people this week, they think that he will be thinking a lot about the debate because he's so televisually minded. But then again, what everybody said is it doesn't matter who it is because Kamala Harris is so bad.
Yeah.
And that whoever it is will get trounced by Kamala Harris. The idea is you either have someone who you think will, like it could be Tulsi Gabbard, who in 2020 she ripped into Kamala Harris very well as a Democrat, or it could be Tim Scott, who's very sort of gentle and benign, but it's felt that he would contrast very well with Kamala Harris. So I think actually the vice presidential debate will be the more interesting watch, although nowhere near as many people will watch.
Yeah. At Spiked, we know how important it is to be free and independent. One of the best ways to gain more agency over your life is to become your own boss. But leaving the 9 to 5 to set up your own business isn't easy. It comes with tons of unpredictable challenges. Luckily for you, there's a way to make that leap a little simpler, and it sounds like this. Yes, that's the sound of another sale on Shopify, the revolutionary all-in-one commerce platform that makes starting a business simple. Shopify supports entrepreneurs like you across the globe. Whether you trade in ceramic mugs or 3-pin plugs, Shopify can simplify how you sell goods both online and in person. Making your big idea a reality has never been this simple. Shopify brings your whole business under one easy-to-use online hub. This makes managing goods, taking payments, and adapting your business incredibly simple. Shopify also launches your business on those all-important social media marketplaces, from Instagram to TikTok. Wherever they are, Shopify will help you reach your customers. And don't worry about losing your newfound independence either. Shopify's extensive tools help your business stay unique. You can constantly tweak your web presence without having to become an expert in web design. Plus, Shopify's business courses can even help you stay competitive in ever-changing markets. Whatever you need, Shopify is there to lend you a hand. If you want to get serious about starting a business, get Shopify today. Sign up for a £1 per month trial period at shopify.co.uk/spiked. Go to shopify.co.uk/spiked to take your business to the next level today. That's shopify.co.uk/spiked. Let's talk briefly about this very shocking attempt on the life of the Slovakian Prime Minister. Robert Fico was shot yesterday, on the day that we're recording this. I mean, Tom, it's been very strange to see some of the coverage on broadcast and in the newspapers. There hasn't been the usual sort of sympathy that you might see for a leader who has, almost been killed.
Yeah, I mean, a lack of sympathy, a lack of the sense of the gravity of the situation. This is kind of the first sort of major political assassination attempt on a European political leader for over 20 years. It's a very significant moment, a real assault on democracy whenever you've got some lunatic who tries to take out someone who's been democratically elected. But it was interesting how, as soon as you got beyond the kind of first paragraph of each of the news reports, it suddenly began this sort of chin stroking about he's a very polarizing figure. He's been presiding over a very unhappy Slovakia. He's been upsetting the EU because of the fact he's really pro-Russia and pro-Kremlin, and he's leaning into these culture wars and so on. And it got really close to basically just suggesting that he kind of had it coming. I mean, it fell to an analyst on Sky News when this news was breaking last night, to say the quiet part out loud, because he went into the usual sort of routine about he's a very polarizing figure in his country, he's a very polarizing figure in the EU, so it's not really a surprise that something like this would happen. That's almost, with a few ellipses, basically a direct quote. But it's really quite shocking to engage in this kind of thing. And it's interesting as well, because whenever there have been sort of instances of political violence, some of them deadly, some of them not, against centre-left figures or more centrist figures, there has been this very unedifying impulse to blame it on the right and the populists. You know, even if it was some far-right lunatic, you blame it on Brexiteers and the Conservative Party, as happened with Joe Cox, or you blame it on whoever. And yet now we've seen a right populist leader be attacked, and they're blaming it on the right populists as well. So it's an incredibly grubby game. But I didn't really expect that kind of response from an event as serious as this.
Freddie, what have you made of it?
I think Eastern Europe is a complete powder keg, and Ukraine has scrambled everything. And I think, we shouldn't, as Western people who presumably want the West to win in some ways, we shouldn't underestimate the extent to which all the colour revolutions in Eastern Europe, and a lot of Eastern Europe, could well pivot back to Russia. And Putin is very good at exploiting these situations. And it's not going to be long until somebody claims Putin actually did the shooting in Vico, because it was such a clever move for the Russians. But, people talk about Putin and Hitler a lot, World War II and so on. That's not the right comparison. The right comparison is World War One, like the Baltics fracturing, Archduke Franz Ferdinand assassinated in Sarajevo, different spheres of influence pulling in all directions. Now it's China, but before it would have been, Austria-Hungary, whatever. It is a very fractious, divided place, and each country has, in that area, different factors pulling away at it. Yeah. We just don't understand in the West, because all we can think of is pro-Russia, anti-Russia, In fact, it's just so much more complicated. Talk about something like Georgia. What's going on in Georgia at the moment? Absolute chaotic scenes, protests, so on. People think there's a sort of Western revolution happening. No, there isn't. It's much more complicated than that. I think we don't think very sophisticatedly about Eastern Europe. Not that I do, to add that. but if you watch the news, you get the sense that there is no real understanding.
Yeah, it is implied that he's sort of analogous to a kind of Brexiteer or something like that.
Yeah. Which of course many had it coming.
Yeah. Let's move on to something a bit lighter. Talk about Meghan and Harry's trip to Nigeria. Meghan kind of saw it as a bit of a homecoming. She said that the Nigerians welcomed her home. I mean, this is on the basis that she discovered on a DNA test that she's 43% Nigerian, but she's never visited Nigeria before. She doesn't have any relatives there or anything like that. I mean, Tom, what have you made of it?
I mean, the first thing to say is that it's a wonderful sort of carnival of cringe. As whenever Harry and Meghan do anything, it's like this. But particularly so, her walking around and thanking people for welcoming her home. Prince Harry took to referring to various Nigerians he met as his in-laws.
Yeah.
At one point, Meghan was saying that she's going to have to start dressing more colourfully. I mean, it was like the most crude kind of stereotypes as well that they were trading in. There's also something actually quite backward about this kind of point that she's making, which is effectively because she spit in a test tube and they found out that if you trace the black side of her family back, they come from that part of West Africa, that therefore she is Nigerian.
Yeah.
Therefore that this is entirely kind of racial, biological. It has nothing to do with whether you've visited the place, whether you've got relatives there, whether you have citizenship connection with it, whatever. It's just the fact that you're either in category A or category B or category C, and that's absolutely it. I mean, it would be the equivalent. I mean, presumably, I think on her dad's side they're all German. It'd be like her going there and saying this is like coming home. I mean, it would be an odd thing to do, but because of racial identity politics, I suppose, and because of the very American racial identity politics that she's obviously quite sort of inculcated in, you find this ridiculous scene of her going to Nigeria and claiming to be one of them on the basis of just doing 23andMe or whatever. Yeah. But it's like for anyone else that would be a fun anecdote. Yeah. But for someone like Meghan Markle, it's like changed her whole world.
It's like a woke version of the one drop rule, isn't it, basically?
I think my theory is that the test told her that she's actually 43 years old. And she decided that meant she was 43% Nigerian. I think Harry does genuinely seem to love Africa. He's always been a big part of his kind of PR thing.
Spent a lot of time there.
And even though I can't stand him, I think he's awful. I think that's the one thing he's quite good at is kind of being out there in sort of press PR stunts.
Sort of bonhomie and relating to people.
He's quite good in crowds, exactly. But I just, I think that the tension with the palace is obviously so bad now. There was a story about his dad refusing to see him and so on. And, if a father with cancer can't bring a family together, it's hard to know what can. So I think things are really, really bad. I
mean, some of these kind of royal tours, or not so royal tours as they are now with Harry and Meghan, they always, bring out the gaffes, bring out the cringe. I mean, it sort of brings that South Africa trip to mind. Yeah, do you remember that one?
Yeah, it wasn't. If the one I'm thinking of wasn't necessarily a trip to South Africa, but it was when she claimed that a South African actor had come up to her at the premiere of The Lion King and said that we celebrated your marriage on the streets of South Africa the same way we did when Mandela was freed. And it was a ridiculous line. It was in, I think, a big glossy magazine profile. And obviously it didn't take long for the tabloids to go and try and find out who this gentleman was. It's not hard to narrow it down when you've got those details. Not only does this actor in general have no memory whatsoever of this encounter, he also, quite rightly, and various other people said, it's quite offensive comparison to suggest that this marriage is the equivalent to, Mandela finally walking to freedom. But you get this all of the time. And it's one of those things where even though it's not an original point, the extent to which those two kind of create their own reality quite explicitly it never really, ceases to stagger me, really. And it's what has, maintains the interest in this story, is because aside from, yes, they really rile people up, and yes, they also make people on the other side of the culture war quite defensive and want to protect them, they're also really unintentionally hilarious. Yeah. And I think that's a big part of the reason we'll continue to watch the Harry and Meghan show, even as it sort of limps on for another ridiculous, cringy season all the time.
I think one of my favourite sort of repeated, actually, Meghan, stories, let's call it that, is when she claims to have had a letter from Hillary Clinton Do you remember this one, Freddie?
yes.
Where, because
Her absolute favourite.
she protested against
sexist
soap advert.
Yeah.
And she claims, that she single-handedly managed to get the campaign dropped, was congratulated by Hillary Clinton, who was First Lady of the United States at the time. It turns out that, none of that is true, that there were obviously many women who were offended by the advert, not just Meghan, but also this letter from Hillary, apparently, according to her father, never even existed.
Well, that is according to the father, who we can't completely rely on. But I mean, she's been feeding off that story for ages. I mean, long before she met Harry, she was doing that story.
Yeah, it was on her, and it was even even after it's sort of been semi-debunked in the papers, she still told it on the first episode of her new podcast.
Yeah.
It was in the first episode of the Harry and Meghan Netflix show. I mean, she's dining out on it even after it's been quite heavily questioned.
As I said, I said about the presidential debate that I like watching Disaster Telly. I'm going to miss the Spotify podcast.
Yeah,
because it was so bad, and it was so kind of completely banal, and it would always start with a bit of kind of etymology. So she'd say the word. Hang on, the only one I can think of is
it'd be these
bitch.
kind of archetypes, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
There were 7 archetypes. The only one I can think of is bitch, though.
Yeah,
say
or like the angry black woman or something like that, and then she would like unpick it or whatever.
Yeah. So what was it? Diva. There'd be something like diva, and then she would say, "Oh, the word diva comes from there's Greek." Blah, blah, blah. And you're like, "What? I mean, what?" And then it would sort of you were just sort of trying to process what she's saying there. Then she sort of throw in a guest. The guest would start talking about themselves, and she'd immediately interrupt them and talk about herself instead. And it was just fascinating to hear and hilarious.
Yeah,
really hilarious.
Yeah, I don't think I learned anything about Serena Williams when she appeared on the
That was the only one I got through. So I was like, this is someone who's really achieved something.
Yeah.
And you keep being interrupted like, do you remember the first time we met? It's very, very odd.
So Gary Lineker has waded into the Israel-Palestine debate once again. There's a clip of him doing the rounds. He was on Mehdi Hassan's show, quite inexplicably. And this is his sort of, I think probably one of the first acknowledgements he's made of the 7th of October attacks.
I can't think of anything that I've seen worse in my lifetime. The constant images of children losing their lives day in, day out. Now, obviously, we all know what, October 7th happened and, the Hamas thing.
The Hamas thing. Yeah, no big deal.
It's an unfortunate choice of words.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't want to hang him on that basis necessarily. But it is incredible that in this clip he's talking about, obviously talking about the war in Gaza. This is the worst thing I've ever seen in my lifetime, despite the long list of horrendous atrocities, genocides, attempted and foiled, that have happened over the course of since he's been on the planet.
Yeah.
And also the fact that he, as with many people, often when they're kind of new to the Israel-Palestine thing, they've just sort of imbibed the talking points via Twitter or whatever, it seems to be his case, is that they have this real, they at the very least stumble about talking about what actually sparked this conflict in the first place. Like to even admit to some sort of provocation, the atrocity of October the 7th itself, to even basically accept Israeli victimhood in this situation is something that I'm not saying he's denying it, but there's a kind of frog in the throat phenomenon that happens. And I thought that was what came out when you find yourself on a big platform like this show referring to the Hamas thing.
Yeah.
When you're talking about horrendous sort of protest genocidal atrocity. It's incredible the kind of brainworm that exists on this issue for people like Lineker.
Yeah.
I know I can't talk because I talk a lot of rubbish for a living, but he's a football pundit, and the reason he was chosen as a football pundit is because he's quite intelligent. He was quite intelligent for a footballer. He's quite intelligent for an ex-footballer. But when he says, the way he said that there reminds me of watching Match of the Day, where he's talking about like the Christmas tree formation or something. It's like he's sort of shrugging as he says it, like because he knows it's just pundit talk. Yeah. As someone who's been blocked by Gary Lineker, I know what he's like on social media. He is feeding. He's very self-absorbed, and he's feeding all this sort of praise that he gets. He has a lot of fans still on social media. A lot of people are very loyal to him. If you criticize Gary Lineker, you get a lot of people coming after you. And he's just fed into this Palestine kind of TikTok, Twitter, Instagram vortex that there is now. Which has completely warped the debate in a way that I find absolutely extraordinary. Yeah. As someone who's not the most pro-Israel person in the world, I find myself sympathising with Israel more and more because I cannot understand this kind of just wash of brainwashed thinking wash of brainwash thing.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense. But that's going on.
It's kind of, it's like virtue signaling, but with no virtue almost.
Yeah.
It's very the current thing to use that sort of Twitter term. But that's one thing that I've been quite struck by in terms of the responses to October the 7th, is in terms of the really anti-Israel invective. You expect that from the Islamists and the far left. You expect them to kind of spout insane conspiracy theories and anti-Semitic bile. I've almost been more disquieted by the fact that the sort of liberal left centrists, those sort of low information, high status virtue signalers, a Gary Lineker, a James O'Brien, how they've very naturally imbibed all of the sort of anti-Israel talking points, how even though probably neither of them could have found Gaza on a map last year, they're suddenly really up to their necks in this issue. They're suddenly saying things. I heard James O'Brien on the radio the other day talking about how the original version of Israel's Eurovision song, which was basically about October the 7th, was war propaganda, like saying things that might have got you kicked out of the Labour Party not too long ago. It's even become the kind of, as you said, the sort of virtue signalling opinion amongst people who don't really have an ideology as such, apart from just liking to look good in public. That's almost more concerning, because if that becomes the sort of default position of the dinner party set, that has almost much bigger ramifications than whatever Owen Jones is saying on his YouTube channel. If you see what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And the way that, various people have, someone like Greta has attached herself to it. It's like it's part of a sort of broader suite of opinions that you have to hold, if that makes sense. If you care about the climate, you must care about Palestine. If you're queer, you have to care about Palestine.
Even if it doesn't necessarily care about you all the time.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, there won't be gay or trans liberation until Palestine is free.
Well, and I wonder whether we can actually, whether we'll ever be able to get away from this in the age of social media, because everybody's seen videos of babies being killed or dismembered and so on. And that boils up the blood. And if you don't know a lot and you see a video of a baby being killed, you do think, oh, that's horrific. But it's happened for a lot. And it's happened in the Ukraine war. The Russians all have their own propaganda feeds. The Ukrainians have all their own propaganda feeds. And everything is this kind of extra angry online vitriol. And nobody actually knows what's going on. So, particularly in Ukraine, you see that, where nobody knows what's going on in the Ukrainian conflict, really. Maybe a few people do. But everybody's got very strong opinions about Ukraine without knowing anything of the detail. Yeah, and although that conflict seems to have sort of fallen out of the current thing. It's been replaced.
Yeah. Gary Lineker is probably not going to get a standing ovation in M&S for tweeting about Ukraine.
I forgot about that. That was very funny. But we should show solidarity with him, because obviously he's a childhood victim of racism, so it's important to point that out. But no, I think it is a reminder. Social media has been great in many respects in terms of being able to disseminate information, give people platforms, all that goes without saying. But there is a certain type of person who it has just been nothing but a kind of pox on them and their own intellect. I think Gary Lineker is a good example of that. Even in that interview, I watched the whole thing out of morbid curiosity. He even talks about the fact that he took refugees into his own home because of the fact that when he would tweet about refugees and how the government's, not providing for them and so on, people would say, why don't you have one in your house then? So he went and did that. Rather than say, I'm talking about policy here rather than my own personal self, he just went and did that. This is a man who spends at least 12 hours a day on that app, and he should probably log off.
Yeah, definitely. Sound advice. Thank you so much for watching the Spiked podcast. We'll be back next Friday. If you hit subscribe and click the bell, you'll never miss an episode. And in the meantime, why not check out all of Spiked's other videos and podcasts on this channel? And for more Spiked content, find us at spiked-online.com.